Gennifer.
Yeah.
How are you?
Right now. Shoot. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Okay, thank you for all this work that you put into these.
Oh, please. It's our pleasure.
Good idea. It was a great idea that you
Yeah.
had.
Oh, it wasn't just me. There's a whole team of us. It's pretty great.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
the team had a great idea.
Yeah. We used to do these bookstore and chocolate crawls where we'd lead people on walking tours to indie bookstores and throw chocolate at them.
Uh-huh.
And that sort of turned into this. So it's just been really fun.
I wish I could have chocolate now.
Oh.
I'm gonna get my chair out of the way so it doesn't show up in the.
Oh, perfect.
You always have to go through this little ritual of trying to figure out what people see.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is Lara, by the way, in the corner here. She's our moderator, basically. So she's going to be the one who lets everyone in, keeps everyone on mute, and is also collecting questions throughout the event that I'll ask you guys at the end.
Okay.
It's a slick little setup we've got going here.
I had a couple of people that just gave money and they're not going to show up, but that's good with me.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to complain. It's a little
Right.
different. That's one of the nice things about this versus a bookstore event where it's like the actual day of attendance is sort of like, okay, we'd love you to be here, but if you're still able to give money to Town Center Books, track down the titles from these authors, it's kind of the same.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Yeah.
It's
And
also kind of fun because people from out of the area can be a part of it.
yeah, we did one last week with Jandy Nelson and Nina LaCour, and someone in Australia had woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch it.
Wow.
I know. It was
That
so
is so cool.
Yeah, so Aimee and Avi should be here any second. What we usually do, and I'll go over this when everyone, I'll just go over this when everyone's
Yeah.
here. Congratulations on the new book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
book
Congratulations
birthday.
on yours. How does it feel to, well, it's your second book, right?
My second book, first novel. So it's
First
like,
novel. So how does it feel to launch a novel?
like my underpants are in the world and everybody's looking at them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's very painful, isn't it? You don't realize, because you have this little bubble around yourself when you write, and then all of a sudden people will say these things to you and it's like, ooh.
Yeah, there have been some wild interpretations where I was like, wow, okay. It's like high fantasy. It's a totally made up world. And somebody was like, this book is pretty historically inaccurate. And I wanted to be like, what? Yeah, it would be. But okay.
It's not historical fiction.
Yeah, it's not my job to say anything anymore, but okay.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. I don't have, I've never developed a thick skin, which is unfortunate.
Honestly, that's very refreshing to hear. Most really established authors are like, oh, it's nothing to me now, like water off a duck's back. And it's like,
no,
okay.
I wish I were like that, but I'm just not. It just, every time I just want to crawl under the desk,
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar to me.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that, you don't remember like the glowing things so much as, at least I don't. I remember when, someone says, the historical fiction is inaccurate when you've written a fantasy. That's what I remember.
Clearly, I'm wired the same way.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Hopefully they get here at any second now.
Oh, Avi, I just let in. Who else are we
Oh,
waiting
great.
for?
Aimee Lucido. Aimee spelled Aimee.
All right, there she is. Where is that? Sorry about that. I just got,
No worries.
Okay.
Lara, how are you? It's nice to see your face.
Oh, no, it's not. I mean, the thing is, like, the reason I say that is like my first Zoom meeting of the day is when I get like a good look at myself and I'm like, oh my God, my hair,
I know. It's so true. It's
right?
It's a rude awakening, isn't it?
That's a rude awakening. And it's like, this is, for women over 40 or over 50, it's like, this is the worst angle in the world. And I'm like, I can't, because I'm on this, anyway.
Put books underneath your laptop. So it's like,
I know, but then
I say that not having done that myself.
I know.
I definitely have my books. Oh my gosh.
Aimee, hi. Aimee, this is Gennifer and Lara. Laura's our on-hand moderator, so she's going to be the one doing kind of crowd control. She'll be passing me questions to ask y'all at the end of the event from the audience. You're still on mute. Laura,
I like the way you said crowd control. That's so optimistic.
You know, I think we had, let me double check. I think there's like 60 people signed up for this, which is pretty good. That's a legitimate number of people. It's not like, you know, 8 people sitting in a circle in a bookstore.
Yeah.
Oh, the amount of times I have put chairs into a circle. Yeah, we sold 63 tickets and we've raised $1,132 for Towne Center Books.
That's pretty good. I'm happy with that.
Flipping great. So,
all right, I'm gonna message Avi if you can hear us. It looks like you need to engage your audio.
I don't see him on the participant list, but that could just be.
Yeah, no, he's there, but video's off and there's no, I don't see any microphone icon.
Okay. So he is forthcoming. This is why we make you guys show up early so we can try to hammer this out. So what we typically do is we'll open the doors at noon, which is when you should stop cussing and maligning public figures. And then at 12:05, I'll start the event. I'll introduce We Love Bookstores very briefly, and then I'll hand it off to Aimee. And we'll go over the rest of this when Avi's here, but that's the general. We'll get going in about 10 minutes. We'll open the door in 10 minutes. We'll get going in earnest in 15.
Great.
Aimee, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you guys doing?
Good. How's my dog's dog twin?
Oh my gosh, he's great. He's such a good dog.
Our dogs look identical. It's
they
like,
really do.
I passed a picture of her dog on Twitter and I thought it was my dog.
There's one other
what
author
breed?
who has, it's a mini golden doodle.
Oh, okay.
Taco's bigger. They're just the same dog in different sizes.
Yeah, they have similar faces too. And like they're like because my dog was the only like lighter one of his litter. Because I think like the darker colors are more like the apricot's more like the popular color now.
Yeah,
he was kind of like
the red ones.
Yeah, but he was kind of a fluke of his litter, and so he's like a light cream when he's clean. When he's dirty, he's he looks darker.
Doesn't that make you feel bad every time you give him a bath and he comes out a different color and you're like, I'm sorry I let this happen to you, man.
We bathe him like every week. Just
wow.
He gets really dirty. He's
taking better care of your dog than I am.
Yeah, I know. My God, every week. That's impressive.
We have we don't really have too much of a choice. He has a walker who has a private ranch. Which is like seriously, my dog has a better life than 90% of the United States right now because he goes out for like 6 hours a day and plays with friends in a park in the outdoors, but he comes back filthy every day because he likes to dig, and so he gets his legs get really dirty.
Yeah.
And so by Friday we're like, okay, you smell like the outside.
When we lived in the city and had a dog walker with Taco, we used to wash him a lot more often. Also before we had a baby. His amount of bathing has gone down precipitously with.
You can only handle bathing so many creatures per week.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard enough to get in the shower myself. So let's see.
I'm a little concerned.
Well, you look like you took a shower this morning, Maggie, so we're pleased.
I know. I hope you're very impressed. This is my A game. Laura, how's it going over there with Avi?
I've messaged him and
I'm gonna just jump in my email and make sure he's not trying to reach me there. I should have had that open this whole time.
Yeah. It's weird. It's like there's no microphone icon, which I'm guessing means that he hasn't joined the audio.
Okay, he hasn't emailed. I'm gonna try to get him. It's funny, I feel like every time we did an event on Wednesday with an author who's like clearly incredibly proficient with online events, but just hadn't used Zoom for them. And it's like a learning curve for every one of these platforms.
Yeah,
totally. And
the problem is always screen share. I never know where the screen share button is on a new platform. But that's not going to be an issue today.
The other thing that's fun to do towards the end is I'll unmute all of the participants, and so everyone can just say goodbye, goodbye, goodbye as they're heading out.
Just really quick in terms of like the pacing of the event. So we're going to do 45 minutes of Q&A between me, Avi, and Gennifer.
That's correct.
And then like 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right.
So I'll be keeping an eye on the time so that you don't have to.
Perfect.
I'll try to interject as gracefully as I can when it's like 11:43 to give you
Great.
a warning that we're coming up toward the end here.
I'll keep my eye on it also just in terms of like, because I have like categories of questions. And so I'm going to want to move through the categories over the course of the 45 minutes.
Love that hyper organized approach. I'm into it. Yeah, so that's exactly it. I'll intro the event series. I'll hand it off to you as our panel moderator. And then you'll do the Q&A that you've organized. At 11:45, we'll do Q&A from the audience. And that's kind of it. The only awkward part is at the end. There's just no graceful way to end Zoom events. So Laura will turn on the sound and you'll see people going, bye, 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 bye. And you'll hear like voices from all over, but you can feel free to sign out as soon as you feel comfortable.
Yeah. And Maggie, do you know if anyone from Town Center is joining? I forgot.
I don't think so. Judy is not particularly tech affectionate.
I love it.
Okay, Avi is having.
Also, Aimee, we should figure out at what point I should ask questions about your novel.
So the way that I'm kind of planning on doing the general event is I would like for it to feel a little bit more like a conversation. So repeat like I don't want it to feel like I'm going to ask Gennifer the question, I'm going to ask Avi the question. So like I might even be responding a little bit to your responses and then be like, oh, Avi, what do you think about what Gennifer said? And so like if there's a natural place, feel free to kind of play off me as well.
Okay.
I feel like
Avi is having trouble signing in. I'm gonna have him call me. Hopefully he reaches me pretty soon here. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Thank you for thinking of me, Gennifer, by the way. That makes me happy.
Of course. Well, you have a wonderful book, so I'm anxious to hear the backstory for it.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this. I loved both Orphan 11 and Gold Rush Girl, in addition to both of your backlists. So this is going to be very fun for me. I like your bookshelf behind you, by the way.
Well, yeah, we only for a while. I did 5 virtual events yesterday.
Wow.
150 feet of cord going up from here to the internet just in case there was some problem. But today it seems pretty stable. So I guess it was day before yesterday I had that. Today it's pretty stable. But my husband's standing by as tech support. So.
Is that a typical day with like a bunch of meeting or a bunch of virtual events, or was that sort of a one-off with the 5 in a row?
Well, I did 8 for Hicklebees.
Oh,
so
nice.
That was really nice because they said, that was great. And not all bookstores are set up yet to do this. Yeah. And our fleet of foot that they could change so quickly from boots on the ground kind of events to technology driven events. Yeah. So I think that's going to change because I think people see that we're going to have to incorporate this into the arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on in. He still hasn't called. Oh, I love watching
that I've like interviewed at this point. And then also, and Gennifer's Alcatraz series has, I don't know how many of you live in San Francisco, but I do. And so when I found out there were books about Alcatraz, which is like, I'm not up north, but when I go up north, I can see it. I've been there. That was very exciting. And so I've read the whole series. And so I'm very, very excited. And also I've seen Gennifer speak at SCBWI conferences, and we've run into each other at various events. So this is very, very exciting for me. Maggie, how we doing?
Fingers crossed we get him here soon.
Do you want us to get started on talking about?
I think let's go ahead and get started. We're going to hope that Avi joins us at any second. I'm emailing with his assistant now. We're trying to hammer this out.
Awesome.
Always exciting with tech.
We're in uncharted territory.
Yeah. Really quickly before you guys get going, thank you all so much for joining us. This is a We Love Bookstores event. I'm Maggie Takuta Hall. Today we're raising money for Towne Center Books, which is an amazing indie bookstore in Pleasanton, California. And we've raised over $1,100 for them, which is fantastic. So thank you guys so much for your donations and for your time. Aimee and Gennifer, take it away while I furiously refresh my email constantly.
Yay. And if you need us, just,
yeah, I'll jump in.
Great. So Gennifer, I am so excited to be talking about Orphan 11. I just read this book a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to have a physical copy to hold up, and mine hasn't come in yet. But I really love this book. It's like so Orphan 11 is actually, maybe you should introduce the book, since you probably have a much more nifty pitch than I do for it. Gennifer, do you want to explain, or maybe not?
I don't know. But basically it's the story of an orphan who is looking for her voice and trying to come to terms with what silenced her. It's a little bit of a mystery set in the 1939 circus, which was a really vibrant place because all creativity and really creative people that didn't fit into the box, they gravitated towards the circus. In 1939, we were a more constricted society. And so the circus was a place where anything could happen. So it was really a fun place to set the book.
And I think one thing that I loved about it was I loved how like atmospheric it was. Like it really, to me, gave like a very mysterious setting. Like I felt like the whole thing took place at night, and like there were stars out. Like it was just a very beautiful setting. And I think there's a sister story at the heart of it. And it's sort of about found family and like finding your voice, both literally and metaphorically, which is something that I really love. And so I'm really excited. I'm excited for everyone to read it, and I'm excited to be talking about it with you today. So I'm going to ask some questions about Orphan 11 in particular. So I'm curious. I want to hear a little bit about the story behind the story. I think every book has like a long and winding road to publication. So I'm curious, like what inspired the story? How long have you been working on it? Like, what's the story behind the book?
Well, actually, I started out, this book is not about the orphan train, but that's what I started out researching. I have like maybe 12 books about the orphan train. And I developed this book that was called The Con Man's Apprentice. And the main character was Nico. Nico actually is an Orphan 11, but he's not the main character. And then he had this friend named Lucy. And Lucy didn't speak. That's all I could figure out about her. And so I kept trying different backstories on her, and none of them worked. So I backburnered the book for a while. And one day I happened to be in this bookstore, and I was looking through some nonfiction books, and I discovered the backstory for Lucy. And that meant that since it's an actual historical record, I had to set the book at a different time when the orphan train didn't go. So there went the orphan train. So I set it in 1939 when this actual historic event happened. And so there is a little of the Con Man's Apprentice, a little bit, because Nico's story does show up, but he is not the main character. And as soon as somehow I realized this, I wrote about 6 chapters of the Con Man's Apprentice, and then I wasn't going anywhere with it. But as soon as I figured out who Lucy was, it went off like a shot.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So Nico was originally the main character.
Yes.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So what percentage would you say of the story is rooted in like actual people and history, and what percentage is what was the creative process and your own imagination?
Well, though it's based on something that historically happened, all the characters are fictionalized. Okay. So I imagined what would have been if the character was involved with this. So I guess there's more research in terms of the circus that I used. So there's a lot of actual circus events. Lucy becomes or wants to be an elephant girl or a bull girl, as they were called. And there was a performance that one of the elephants did. And I wanted one that was really unusual, not the usual kind of elephant stuff. And so I went to the archives for the in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And I found an actual performance that an elephant did. And it's really unusual. So that is
oh my gosh.
True. So what
So
happens?
that part's true.
That part's true.
Oh, that's so funny because it's a very quirky elephant routine.
Very quirky, and
That's
whole
great.
thing, the performance is quirky, and I just went with the whole thing. So that's probably the most true part of the book.
That's so interesting. So you mentioned that this book started off as the orphan train, and it kind of moved into the circus.
Right.
So I'm curious. So I have a lot of questions about sort of like your historical research. So I'm curious about the circus part in particular. How do you have like a connection to the circus? Is that sort of how the circus part came into it? And how do you research 1930? Like, because I feel like circus is so visual. How do you research circuses that you can't even see anymore?
Well, it turns out there are lots of people who are circus buffs, and there's an organization called the Circus Historical Society, and they have everything. They put a newsletter out every month. And they have been doing it for years and years and years. So that is the best source I found for historical record. But there's, I went to a conference for the Circus Historical Society. It was 4 days long. And it was so much fun because people who had been circus performers were there, people who had been candy butchers, behind the scenes, managers, and a lot of American studies professors who studied American history through the lens of the circus. So many erudite kind of speakers at that conference. It was such a mix of people that had been there and people that had studied it. And so that was just really thrilling. And I used a lot of the Circus Historical Society stuff. And then, there's tons of people that are circus buffs. And so there really is a huge record around the circus history. So it's not that hard to research.
Oh, that's so interesting. So I'm curious, what are some interesting circus facts that you learned that didn't make their way into the book?
Well, there's one about an elephant so circuses used to have a place called winter quarters. So, circuses in the East Coast where it's really snowy, they couldn't travel by rail and perform during the winter. So they would go to winter quarters. And so a lot of the book actually takes place in winter quarters. And there's a story about an elephant that had been at winter quarters, then he was sold to another circus. And for like 12 years, he was at this other circus. And then he was bought back and returned to winter quarters. And he went into the elephant barn, and then his trunk went up into this weird compartment in the rafters, and he pulled down a bag of peanuts. He had kept there for years and knew was there. I also went to Thailand to spend time with elephants because I wanted the elephant stuff to be really real. And I met an elephant who elephants eat all the time. You can imagine the amount of food required to keep an elephant alive. So this one elephant, between his trunk and his tusk, he kept sugarcane. He would eat a bunch of sugarcane and then he would store it between his trunk and his tusk. And then later, when he got hungry, he would just use it. He'd have the snack with him. It was this kind of fanny pack sort of thing.
Oh my God, that's so funny. That's what I make fun of my husband for if he ever has food in his beard. So I'm curious what, so we talked a little bit about
pick out the food from his beard and then eat it later? I'm just wondering.
He doesn't actually. I say that he could do that. It's like you're saving it for a snack for later.
He's never actually that there.
No, he's not gross. I'm the gross one. So it's okay. So there's sort of two parts to the setting of Orphan 11. There's the circus setting, and there's also the orphanage setting. And I'm curious what the research for the orphanage looked like, especially since you kind of came into the story from the orphan angle.
Right. the orphanage is based on the Soldiers Orphans Home in Iowa, in Davenport, Iowa. And I called it in the book, I didn't like that name, so I called it the Home for Friendless Children, which was actually also an orphanage name. So I didn't make that name up, but I just love that name. Just so dark, I don't know. And that, the orphanage, you know, we don't have orphanages anymore, but the buildings are still there. So I went to visit it, and I spent a lot of time in the Davenport library, main library, because they had a lot of information about it. And you know, when you go someplace, you find out things that you wouldn't be able to find out, you know, just by internet or book sort of research. I think, you know, walking the grounds is really important. I knew that there was a cemetery nearby, but what I didn't know is it's right next door. And, you know, there is a tombstone that says, unnamed orphanage limb, L-I-M-B. Which again, this doesn't really exactly make its way directly into the book. So it's not a ghoulish book, but the fact that you know, somehow that cemetery, it really fed my imagination about what could happen, because it's based on a historical record. I realized that the matrons, as they were called, I didn't make that up, of the orphanage had really good reasons for not wanting family members to know that the main character was there, to keep them apart. There was a really good reason for that just came out of research. So anyway, that's a side. I'm going on a tangent here.
Interesting. I want to ask about something, but I don't want to spoil for people who people have only had 2 days to read the book, so I'm going to be very careful not to spoil. Not to spoil the specifics. So I want to talk a little bit about the characters, because you said the characters are completely fictionalized, but there are some historical elements in it. So so the main character, she has a sister named Dilly who communicates with her throughout the book through letters, and I'm curious how that kind of thread came into the story as letters, because I personally find backstory to be one of the hardest things to include in my book when I write. And so I think the notion of like an external character writing letters and kind of telling the backstory that way is a very clever way to do that. Was that something that started did that come to you early on in the process? Was that something you kind of revised your way into? How did you settle on that?
It came really early in the process, because I realized that, you know, I'm putting my main character Lucy through literal hell, not literal hell, but figurative hell. And I wanted to be able to weave in a happy ending. I was not willing to write about this without there being a happy ending. And so that's why I imagined that, you know, maybe she had an older sister, and this sense of them trying to connect with each other felt very viscerally powerful to me.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I guess maybe because I'm very close to my siblings and to my 2 cousins. The 5 of us are really like a pack. And so I could imagine if one of us went astray, that the rest of us would really be so motivated to bring that person back into the fold.
Yeah. And I think as a reader, like, to me, it kind of shows all the different ways a family can be a family, because, you know, you have like the group of kids who are being each other's family when they're on the road, and then you have the circus family, and then you have the sister who kind of becomes the maternal figure. And I think that was sort of the sense that I got, was this really beautiful sense of like, look at all the different definitions we have of family. Like she never was really an orphan, even though she was, because she had this connection. And I think, and a lot of the orphans in the orphanage are not really orphans in that literal sense. Like, their parents are still alive. So I think that was sort of an interesting theme that I found throughout was that the found family theme. I really love that.
Thank you. It doesn't like
Did someone saying something? Okay, I thought I heard Maggie back on the line. Okay, so I want to talk, kind of zoom back a little bit and talk about your body of work a little bit more at large. So you've written like a handful of quite a few historical fiction books at this point.
Avi. Oh my
Not
God.
as many-
Avi is here, you guys. We got him in. Everyone celebrate. Yay!
Oh, I'm so excited.
Okay, I'll put myself back on mute. I just wanted to make sure y'all know he had joined the meeting.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll switch and do that same set of questions for Avi now. So Avi, hi, my name is Aimee Lucido, just to reintroduce myself, especially if people are kind of coming in. My debut book just came out back in September. It's called Aimee and the Key of Code. And I have been a big fan of Avi since I was 12 years old reading Charlotte Doyle.
Thank you.
And when I
Thank you for telling me how old I am.
you've had an impact on kids who then grew up to become writers. So yeah. I hope that I'm sure this point you know that, but still just to remind you again.
I congratulate you on your first book. So
thank you very much. But yeah, so I reread Charlotte Doyle when I found out I was going to be interviewing you, because it was a book that I read and loved as a kid. And then I read Gold Rush Girl, and which and it's interesting because the books are in some ways very similar, which I thought was interesting. And I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit more about the similarities later. But I have a bunch of questions about Gold Rush Girl that I want to ask you. So actually, first we should talk about what Gold Rush Girl is. And Avi, I would love it if you could explain it, because I bet you have a much more succinct pitch than I would have for the book. Can you explain what Gold Rush Girl is about?
It's the story about a girl who's on the East Coast, and there's a economic depression. Her father decides to go to California because gold has just been discovered. He doesn't want to take her. She's stowaways on his ship and gets there with her younger brother. The father, goes off to look for gold, leaving her own with her younger brother, who's very unhappy. She does fine. The younger brother vanishes. She has to find him. And presumably he's been kidnapped. And that's the essential story.
Yeah, this story struck a couple of chords because I went to college in Providence, and so it was very cool to see a lot of like Wickenden and like specific street names that I knew, and then for them to go to San Francisco where I live now and be like, I know the Embarcadero, I know Market Street. And the fact that all the ships are buried beneath what is now the Embarcadero is also very, very cool. So I had a very personal connection to the story, and then on top of that, it's a riveting adventure story. Like I was at the edge of my seat the whole time. I really wanted to know what happened. It was really engaging.
Well,
so I'm curious about this is maybe a weird way of phrasing it, but how do you make it so engaging? Like one thing that I noticed in both Gold Rush Girl and also in Charlotte Doyle is that you'll have like kind of a section in the middle where they're just like they're like on a ship or they're hunting for something and nothing is specifically happening, and yet I find myself being so engaged and wanting to know what happens next. So when you do your plotting of your stories, is that something that you consciously think about? And if so, how do you think about making a story so engaging when they're just on a ship, they're just sailing, or they're just hunting for something they're not finding?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you here because I do it intuitively. I don't have a theory. I couldn't teach you how to do it. I just do it. And I just invent it as I go along, rewrite it endlessly so that you don't notice I'm rewriting. And then when I get to the end, I stop. So that's okay. I think that to some extent we all kind of have to build our intuition in this industry and just like go by ear at some point. So you mentioned endless revision. I'm curious about the story behind the story for this book. I think every story kind of has like a reason why it exists. So what is the story behind the story? And that means like, what was your inspiration for it? Like, did it go away and then come back? What was its path? I was walking along the Embarcadero, and they had flags on with pictures. And on the pictures was the bay full of hundreds of deserted ships. I wanted to know what they were. I found out and said, I'm going to find a story to use those ships. That's it, all it is. So
And out of that, you know, when I say I rewrite, I must rewrite every book I do about 80 times. So I can't tell you how it works. I have my own mantra about this, that writers don't write writing, they write reading. And all I want to do is create a good read. And I'm a reader, as you are. And out of my intuitive, private judgment of what makes for a good read, that's the way I write.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, or as complicated.
Yeah.
That's all I do.
I think Maggie's trying to raise her hand.
Just really quickly, I wanted to let the audience know that y'all can type questions in the chat box that we'll filter through, and at the end we're going to do a little audience Q&A. So if you have burning questions for our authors, go ahead and type those in. Ignore me once again.
So you both write historical fiction, and I'm curious, because I feel like your approaches to historical fiction are very different, and I at least that's how it feels as a reader. I guess I don't know if you research differently, but I like to think there's like a spectrum of historical fiction. There's the Octavian Nothing, which is like as accurate as physically possible, and then there's like My Plain Jane, which is like, we're gonna set this fun book in the past, and who, like, it's a fun book, you know? So it's sort of like, are we going to get a feel for history, or are we going to be as accurate and precise as possible? So I'm curious, where do you see yourselves falling in this imaginary spectrum? You know, and how do you know, is that something you do consciously, or is that something that just, it's your voice?
Gennifer, how do you want to answer that?
Okay. I guess I would say it sort of depends on the book. But I try and have the history be accurate, but the stories are all made up. And sometimes it gets a little confused because in, you know, the Al Capone books, I have Al Capone is in the book, and he's talking to characters who are fictional. So I have to pretend I'm Al Capone to try and figure out what his voice is like, but that's a real fictional leap. So that's as close as I can make it, but it's still, you know, as I said, it's still fiction. So the history is accurate as I can make it, but there's a big fictional element. And I'm most interested in story. It's all about the story for me. And the history just serves the story, or inspires it, or gives me details for the story. But the story is king, queen, empress.
Shady.
Yeah.
For example, in Gold Rush Girl, there's a whole section that takes place on Alcatraz. It's Gennifer's book.
That's right.
So the spot where the kids are sitting at night, I sat there. I went there and I sat there and I just looked and remembered and then wrote it. So that's as accurate as I can make it.
Yeah.
In the same spot. But everything else is, there's nothing about San Francisco in that story that I invented. Absolutely nothing. It's all, I mean, there's an immense literature about San Francisco, about the gold rush. Now you could write another book with a whole series of different bits of information and you'd have a different book. But it would be just as accurate as mine or Gennifer's. As she said, the facts simply are pegs to hang on the fiction. So the facts make it easier to write the fiction.
Yeah.
I think.
Me too.
Interesting.
Because you can go from fact to fact, and all you need. When my youngest son watched movies, I used to joke that his idea of a narration was 5 explosions connected by a chase. And in a certain sense, think of the facts as explosions, and I'm just chasing from one fact to another with characters that I invent.
Yeah, it seems like that's something I talk about a lot when I talk about my own work is that form, or is that content is dictated by form, and it seems as though that's a very similar concept to what you're talking to, where like the story is going to be dictated by the history.
When you went to Brown University, I can tell.
Yeah.
You have a whole theoretical approach to literature. I know.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually, Aimee, about why you decided to write verse, your novel in verse.
Yeah, so yeah, to go back to the idea of form and content. So I had never written a verse novel before Aimee and the Key of Code, but I'll kind of explain what the story is about because it is relevant. So the concept is it's about a 12-year-old girl who comes from a family of musicians. Her name is Aimee. Her dad is a piano player. Her mom is an opera singer, but she feels like she's not good at music. She feels like no matter how much she tries to play, she can't actually make the sounds that her fingers make, the sounds that her voice make, imitate the music in her head. And so she decides when she moves to San Francisco for her dad's job, she decides, you know what, I'm not good at music. I'm not going to try anymore. I'm going to do something totally different, which is computer science. But what she discovers is she can't actually escape music because she loves it. It's in her body. And she discovers that she actually can make music, but maybe with just a different instrument, which for her ends up being the computer keyboard. So the story is told in verse, and I'll kind of show a little bit, but it's told in these very short poems. But as she learns to code, the poetry starts to incorporate the language of Java, which is the language that I learned to code in, and the language that she learns to code in. But in terms of why I chose to write it in verse, it's because the root of the idea, the seed that I had was the realization of how similar poetry and code are. I was reading The Red Pencil by Andrea Davis Pinkney, and the book has nothing to do with code whatsoever. But for some reason, as I was reading it, it reminded me of the computer science, the coding language Python. Just something about how she uses tabs and new lines and colons. It just reminded me of computer code. And I was like, how cool would it be to write a story in poetry that teaches code along the way, that uses the code to as a poetic form? Because I think people think of code as this really scary thing with, like, you know, ones and zeros floating down the screen and like the Matrix, and like only a genius could understand this difficult language, but it's just English in reality. And I think poetry is the same. I think people get afraid of poetry when it's just English. And so I wanted to write a story that kind of showed that code doesn't have to be scary, that poetry doesn't have to be scary, that kind of taught a little bit about it at the same time. And so I had never written a novel in verse before, but I was like, in order to write this book, it has to be in verse. And so I'll figure out how to do it. You
did.
Thank you. Yeah, and now I have a second book coming out that also uses poetry. It's much more in prose than this one is, but it also kind of incorporates the poetic elements. But I'd originally written it totally in verse, and my editor was like, I say my editor said it. So my publisher is Versify, which means that Kwame Alexander is my publisher, and so he read my first draft of my second book and was like, "This isn't a verse novel." And I was like, "Thank you for giving me permission to not write this whole thing in verse," because it didn't feel like a verse novel. I was writing it, the form and the content didn't line up, so I rewrote it much more in prose. Yeah, thank you for that question. I have a question for both of you, that something that I've been noticing about myself as I write more and more, but since you have larger bodies of work than I do, I'm curious if this holds true like further down the line. So something that I think a lot of authors feel like is that sometimes they feel like they're writing the same book over and over. They're asking themselves the same question. There's something that they're trying to figure out that just keeps coming up thematically in their work. And I don't mean the books are the same. I mean like the core is the same. Like, what is the thing that is there a thread that you find over large bodies of your work that is similar, that sort of makes the book yours?
Well, I guess I often write about siblings. Sibling relationships are really important to me. So I think that you can see that in almost all of my books. Yeah. But I also can interpret that as, are there challenges for me with every book? And there are challenges specific to the book, but there's one challenge that I seem to have every book. And that is that I tend to get things too complicated, because I follow all these different characters, and then pretty soon it's a big mess. So I always have that it's a big mess stage where I have to then step back, simplify, cut characters, and it's always scary when I get to that big mess stage, and I have to remind myself, oh, this happens every book, because it always seems incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes when you're like in the early stages and you're generating ideas, you're kind of building it out, and then you kind of get to the out part and it's the mess, and you have to kind of build it back in. It's almost like a kite, or like a rhombus, or
so
a rhombus.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Avi?
I don't read my books, so I don't know.
Well, actually, I have something that I've noticed in your work, Avi, is that you write about characters that think they want something, and then get that, or they have to work really hard to get that thing they want, and then they realize they don't really actually want it very much. This is like,
Isn't that what you call a novel?
I mean, yeah, but I think that in well, I don't necessarily, I think in Orphan 11, I think Lucy knows what she wants the whole time. She's like, I want a family, and I'm gonna get my family. And I think the way that she gets her family is a little bit different than she initially pictured, but I think ultimately she gets the thing that she wants. I think in both Gold Rush Girl and in Charlotte Doyle, you have a character who thinks they want the stability, and then they kind of get adventure by accident, and then they have the adventure to get back to the stability, and then they realize they don't actually want the stability, and then they go back to the adventure.
Well, I just don't think of it that way.
That's interesting.
I'm afraid I just want to tell a story. I don't think of it in the terms of nothing wrong with it, but I don't think
It's the Brown literary analysis.
But I think it's really true that it's very powerful to have a character that thinks they want something and it's not really what they want. Because I think there's a deeper level of what, that character needs. And that conflict between what they think they want and what they actually need always does make a good novel. So Avi's right.
Yeah.
But, I love to quote something that Robert Frost said. He said, if there are no surprises for the writer, there are no surprises for the reader.
Right.
No surprises for the writer, no surprises for the reader. So I like to be surprised. And I like to find my way and say, oh, I can go this way. This makes for a better story. Or, and I construct my novels so people want to turn the pages. It's as theoretical as I get. But, it's just, I just can't think in complicated terms. The book either works or it doesn't. And sometimes I can figure out why it works. And sometimes, no, I rarely figure out why it works. I can usually figure out why it's not. And then I go back and fix it, It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle inside out. So you cut the pieces and then you try to figure out what the picture is.
I have one last question that I'm going to ask. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people before we turn it over to audience questions. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Avi, about how sometimes you try to figure out what doesn't work, and sometimes you figure it out and sometimes you don't. So I'm curious, we all have books that sit in our drawers that are terrible, that we don't want anybody to see ever. So my favorite question to ask.
You're sneaky, but you keep them, so you must want something with them.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, what are the drawer novels that you have that kind of like burrow into your brain where you're like, one day I'm going to come back to that novel?
Well, years ago, I wrote a book. I wanted to make a very scary book without violence, sort of a psychological thriller, I guess. And I sent it to my publisher, and he said, it's too frightening. We can't publish it. And then about 10 years later, he said, I've been thinking about that, but we should do it now. But I lost it.
Oh gosh.
No idea where.
Oh no.
That's the only one.
One day it'll just turn up.
It'll be on a floppy disk, and what do you do with a floppy disk?
Don't want eBay.
Well, I guess my first two novels were in that category.
Gennifer, I think you froze. We'll give you another second to unfreeze.
The second novel I got an offer for after my first novel, which was Notes for a Liner Dog, came out. And my agent said, oh no, don't sell that one. So we didn't sell it because it wasn't as good as the first novel that actually I published.
That's so funny. Well, I think we have some audience questions. If we should switch over to that. Yeah, okay.
That's great. Yeah, we do have some audience questions. First of all, thank you all so much for being here. There's about 47 of you, and most of you are invisible, but we're so happy to see you. We're also joined by one more extra special guest, and that's Judy, who's the owner of Towne Center Books. She just needs to be unmuted, but if you can see her in the video, there's one person with a bunch of books behind them. That's Towne Center Books, who we've raised $1,100 for today. So she should be, yep, she's unmuted. Judy, if you'd like to say anything, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but you got to come a little closer, girl.
Yeah. Give a big, and TJ, our dog, would like to thank you too. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of you for joining us, and to the authors especially. We've got all your books and we're so excited and can't wait to see you all soon, and thank you for support while all this has been going on. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having us.
Judy.
Thank you for having us.
So we do have some audience questions for y'all. The first one's for all of you, which is from Heidi. Do you feel the characters come out of you from within, or are you collecting from the real world?
I guess
adventure characters.
For me, it's both. I collect a lot of things, but they have to come through my DNA, and otherwise they don't really come to life. And so it's some kind of mix. It's a magical mix. And if I'm really lucky, the character will just pop onto the page so full of energy and verve that I don't have to really do too much to them. I just have to listen to them.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of collecting. Every so often I'll hear like a cool, like someone will be like, oh, I do this when I'm sad. I'll be like, that's an interesting character thing. I should write that down. And then I just forget about it. They fall out. But I think I sort of absorb those subconsciously, if anything. And then the characters kind of, they definitely come out of me. They're definitely facets of who I am. And I feel like I never have like a single opinion about things. Like I'm always very conflicted. And so I have like 3 different characters with 3 different of my opinions on the same topic. And that's sort of how my characters come out.
I'm not very helpful here. I don't know where they come from. You just set them down and they evolve as I rewrite over and over again. They're not complete when I write them, and then maybe by the 40th draft they have something about them that comes alive, and then it's much easier. I don't know. Not helpful.
Yeah, Aimee, I noticed in Aimee and the Key of Code, it felt like there was a part of you that was the teacher and a part of you that was the Aimee.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was, my overinterpretation. Was that true?
No, it's very true. People, because I didn't realize how similar Emmy's name was to my name, Aimee, until my sister told me, and she told me in the way that a sister will, which is, of course, you would name a main character after yourself. But like, I literally didn't realize that they were the same, because first of all, Aimee wasn't in the title until very late in the revision process, so I wasn't hearing it all the time. But also, they look very different. Like, there's only one letter in common in both, because my name is spelled Aimee, so they don't look alike. So I didn't know they were the same. But I get that question a lot because of how similar our names are. But I think I was a lot more social as a kid than I think Aimee is, and I was a lot more like confident in my abilities, I think, than because she's very self-conscious. There were times when I was like that, but I think I was always a much more outgoing kid. But I think Miss Delaney is the teacher, and she was much more my author insert, because as I was writing this, I was still working in tech, and I was sort of discussing leaving for writing. And so Miss Delaney is a character who kind of gave up a life at like a fancy tech company to become a computer science teacher to middle schoolers. And she has there are a couple of like of poems where she kind of reflects on the golden handcuffs of tech life, and that felt much more like my thoughts and feelings at the time. But I think there's a little bit of me of Abigail too, I always was a little bit of like, oh, I can't, like, can I, like, are my friends going to be friends with each other? Like, can I let them talk, or are they gonna, is it gonna explode? And I think that's so I think there's a little bit of me in every character. I very much relate to them all, otherwise they're not going to be sympathetic, I feel like.
Gennifer, we've got a question for the audience from you. Were there any cool facts about the circus that you found in your research that didn't make it into the book?
Well, definitely. I mean, there's I have notebooks full of them. There were a couple of actual characters that I discovered that they were actually, I put them in the background. I wanted them to be more a part. I kept trying to get them to be more a part of the story, but they weren't. One was, there actually was a bird man who dressed, it was actually a woman, but she called himself her, or they, whatever, somebody, I don't know, whatever how they just describe themselves, called herself the bird man. And she always wore this bird outfit, which was really amazing all the time. She never took it off. She was so identified as, you know, the bird person. So there were, I guess, so that world, I'm dying to actually write a second book. So I don't want to talk too much about some of those facts.
A sequel or standalone?
Well, I'd like to write a book from the point of view of Bald Doris.
I love Bald Doris. I just love that they call her Bald Doris.
Right.
So funny.
I have another question for all of you. What advice would you give to an aspiring young writer?
The only advice is read. read. The better the reader you are, the better the writer you are. Can't
Yeah, I think
simpler than that.
Yeah, I think my advice is that no writing is ever wasted. Someone gave an analogy once of making sourdough bread, because every loaf of sourdough bread you make in the same kitchen feeds not just like the sourdough culture, but also like the environment of the kitchen that you make the sourdough bread in. And so even if you burn a loaf of sourdough bread, you're actually improving the environment that you're going to make your next loaf for. And so you may write an entire draft of 10 books and think that they're total trash and that you wasted all that time, but you didn't, because like you're feeding your starter.
Oh, that's a great analogy. I love that.
Isn't that great? I wish I had like the exact quote, because it's so good.
Well, I feel like you have to be kind to your muse. And so when you get ideas, you have to be encouraging. Never say negative things about your own ideas. Just write them down and think of more. That's great. Is there another one? Because I think if you do that, then your muse starts to trust you and starts to come up with more ideas and more ideas. So I actually learned that from, I used to be write advertising, and we had brainstorming sessions. And one of the rules was you always have to be positive about everybody's ideas, no matter how wild they are, because sometimes a really wild idea, you can figure out how it actually will work. So be kind to yourself. Don't say, oh, I'm not a writer because I don't X, Y, and Z. Just say, I am a writer because I come up with ideas, and write them down.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like that answer was for me particularly. I have a question for Avi and for Gennifer together. Both of you write from Herb. Both of you write about very dark periods in history. How do you not get overwhelmed by the sorrow of those periods?
Do get overwhelmed. I mean, look at the moment we're living in right now. How can you not be overwhelmed? I don't think being overwhelmed is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, surely you have all kinds of emotions and reactions to that. I don't think it's a negative.
And I feel like since I write from the point of view of a kid, kids are by nature have a fresher, more optimistic take on things. Everything is new to them. It's exciting. It's interesting. They're not overwhelmed. They're not generally jaded. And so that prevents me from getting depressed about whatever the subject matter is.
We have a question from RJ D. Leon for Avi. They would like to know, or to hear more about the Tales of Dimwood Forest series, what the inspiration was, or any story that you have to share about writing those books.
New one is to be published next week, so there's that. It wasn't meant to be a series. The first one was the book called Poppy, and it's a complicated story, but in essence, the publisher that I was working with collapsed, and yet the book won awards and interest and so forth, and there was an interest in writing more. And another publisher said, well, why don't you extend it? And that's the way they extended. But they weren't written in sequence. Book number 3 was written first, then 4, then 1. Now,
I love that. Oh my gosh.
now
Like Star Wars.
To be published is number 2 in the series. So that's the case. You were talking about characters. Those are characters that feel very fond of, helped enormously by wonderful illustrations. So I don't even have to visualize them, they're right there. But as I say, there's another one coming out next week. So now you have to read 7 of them. So.
I guess I'll end with a question from me, because I love to make sure that we talk about this. What are y'all reading right now that we should all order from Towne Center Books?
Well, I just finished Aimee and the Key of Code, so I definitely recommend that. I also absolutely love The Night Diary. I loved Other Words for Home. We are immensely lucky to have another one and only book, The One and Only Bob, which is fantastic. And if you love The One and Only Ivan, you should definitely read by The One and Only Bob.
And reading, which I wouldn't suggest anyone read, just been doing research about the book that I'm working on now. So just piles of book next to my desk, and I'm checking things all the time and trying to get my information correct. It's not a lot of fun, but it's interesting. So that's what I've been reading.
Yeah, I'm reading a bunch of books simultaneously now. I have a bunch of like projects that I'm working on that require research, but also I just finished Gold Rush Girl and Orphan 11. And so I was reading those at the same time, but the ones that I'm reading simultaneously now, I'm reading Pet. A friend of mine from high school wrote a book that was published this year that I haven't read yet, and that's called All the Places You Don't Belong, or Everywhere You Don't Belong. That's an adult book. I'm reading a bunch of graphic novels because I'm trying to write a graphic novel, and so I'm reading all the Babysitters Club series, which I loved as a young child as well. I'm reading a lot of like kind of younger middle grade graphic novels, so Peapod Farms, Click, and then Camp's the second one. A lot of books in that genre. I'm trying to remember if I literally I've been reading 8 books at the same time, so I'm wondering which other ones I'm forgetting, but those are a lot of the ones that are in my stack at the moment.
Amazing. You have been so wonderful, Avi, Aimee, Gennifer. Thank you so much for being here today to support Towne Center Books. Everyone who's here should know you can buy all of their books. That's Gold Rush Girl, Orphan 11, Aimee and the Key of Code from Towne Center Books, and they can ship them to you, which is great news. Thank you so much for supporting our local independent bookstores. We've got more events coming up this summer that you can see on our website, welovebookstores.org. All the money goes directly to the booksellers who we're supporting. Thank you so much for being here. Now is the one awkward moment of this.
Wait, before you go,
Yeah.
one more book that needs a shout out. Maggie, do you have a copy of The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea on you by any chance?
Yes, but only because I sit at this table all week promoting it. If you
Maggie
are a
just
young
had a book
adult
come
reader and not this is not a middle grade book. I just want to be clear because there's definitely content stuff in it that is not appropriate for the middle grade audience. The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea is on sale now, and you can also order that from Town Center Books. That was very kind of you, Aimee. We are done with our formal programming here. So now's the awkward part that there's just no graceful way to end a Zoom meeting. So we love seeing your faces. Thank you all so much for being here and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, shit. Shit.
This one.
You're going to take it out in the ocean?
Here, one sec.
He's going to sail to you.
Bye. Thanks
Bye.
for coming, y'all.
What I'm doing is I'm putting up a map where basically you scratch off the places that
Gennifer, I can't tell if you're frozen or if you're just really disciplined.
She's just really still.
What was going on? I sort of zoned out.
Yeah, this is what I mean. It's just a little awkward. Anyway,
There's
I'm
no
gonna
other way
put
to-
out
Made
here.
out of
Thank you so
Legos?
much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Town Center Books,
Wow.
thank you.
Woo.